Subway everyday value means many mouth-watering pile-high favorites are $5 footlongs, like the fresh toasted tempting meatball marinara and made-to-your-order BLT. The $5 footlong anthem rolls on, only at Subway, where great everyday value lives. Subway, eat fresh. The B.S. Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the B.S. Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The B.S. Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The B.S. Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the B.S. Report. This is exciting. He's not been on the B.S. Report before. He's fresh off the course at Augusta. From CBS on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline, Mr. Jim Nantz, what's happening?
Hey, there's a lot happening. You know, I feel like I've been through one of the great stretches that anyone could ever be entrusted with in broadcasting. I'm just counting my blessings that I got to be a first-hand witness to the Super Bowl, the Final Four, and the Masters. But the 48 hours or so after that, to be able to be on the BS Report, seriously, I'm honored that you asked, Bill, so thank you.
We're the cherry and the hot fudge sundae of your last 2 months.
I'm kind of like more excited and giddy about this than I was Butler Cabin.
You know, I forgot you did the Super Bowl, too. That really might have been the greatest. So you had one of the top 3 or 4 Super Bowls ever.
Yep.
In my opinion, at least the best March Madness of the last, 15 years. When was the last March Madness that compared to that one from beginning to end?
It's been a long time. The tournament really needed this year. I think it really kind of reaffirmed why we all love college basketball. It had gotten a little drab in recent years, and then all of a sudden this year it just exploded with all kind of, good stories and good vibes, and it felt like the tournament of old. But I agree so far with what you're saying. The story at the Super Bowl is one of the top ever. We definitely made huge strides with the NCAAs. Now, what about the Masters?
Certainly, Nicholas in '86 is the standard, and we'll probably won't see another one like that in our lifetime. This was, from a human interest standpoint, might have been the most compelling, other than the Greg Norman breakdown in '96. I think I would put that at the top still.
My first Masters was the '86 Jack Nicklaus, and I can remember walking off the 16th tower at that time. I was really way over my head. I still can't believe that CBS actually believed that a 26-year-old, now that I'm 50, that they would think that I was actually capable of being able to kind of like handle a scene that was that gigantic. And I was doing that whole broadcast with my teeth, like, what do you call it, chattering?
Right.
And I was afraid as my molars were clicking that little microphone that juts out from the headset right in front of your mouth, I was just sure that it sounded like maybe sometimes I hear the birds chirping in the background. I thought maybe it sounded like a woodpecker or something up in the trees. My teeth, I seriously had the chill bumps and the teeth chattering. I could hardly get my mouth to move. The moment was so big, Jack almost knocked it in at 16 for an ace.
Yep.
And people applauded me for being so spare in my commentary. What they didn't know is that I was just unable to get the words out.
Because at that point, Jack was a freight train. I mean, we really wanted to do something for 30 for 30 about it. And now I think we might actually do something a little bit bigger. But it was amazing because this was like before the era of when you're 46 years old, you can stay in shape with all the stuff that we have now and the diets and, the weight training and all these different things. This is just an old guy with a bad back, who had no business actually competing in this Masters, which also had some of the great players of all time, all, at various peaks of their prime. And by the 16th hole, you just knew, like, it was bigger than all of us. So he's coming toward you. And, are you thinking, birdie? Like, what are you thinking?
I'm just thinking, don't make a fool out of yourself. Whatever you do, just try to get out of here alive so that they invite you back for 1987. And, he stood on the tee and took a while to try to gauge the wind. And you're right. I mean, the leaderboard was filled with names like B.S and Tom Kite, who at the time was the biggest money winner in the history of the game. I mean, he had a great run in the late 70s and early 80s. And
Norman
was right in the middle of the hunt, and it was just filled with drama. And as he was buying some time, throwing grass clippings in the air, I kind of exhausted everything that I had prepared for as far as Jack being a part of this movie. Of course, I've been storing this data in my head and anecdotal stuff since I was a little boy, always thinking that one day, having this far-fetched dream that I was going to be a CBS golf announcer. But I just knew too that you didn't ever want to overtalk it. So I brought in Tom Weiskopf, who was sitting in Butler Cabin alongside Brent Musburger. We were encouraged by Mr. Tricinian, our legendary director, to let's use Weiskopf. He's been the runner-up here 4 times. So I said, Tom Weiskopf, you went to Ohio State. You've known Jack longer than anyone. He's just made eagle at 15. What do you think is going through his mind right now? And I basically could gauge that I had about 50 seconds to set up before Jack was actually going to be in position to hit it again. So I was looking for a nice answer, a couple of paragraphs from Weiskopf, and Tom said, Jim, if I had any idea what was going through Jack Nicklaus's mind right now, I would have won 2 or 3 green jackets myself. Period. And I thought, oh boy, okay. So anyway, Jack stood over the shot. We have this rule at CBS: you never talk over a swing, just as though when we're playing together, you don't talk over someone's shot. So Jack hit the ball, right on line for the slope, which you then know it's going to spin off the slope and threaten the hole. And the way it's in the late afternoon there from that 16th perch, the ball comes flying at you like it's the size of a beach ball. The sun shining on it. It's just it looks way bigger than a golf ball, and it comes spinning off the hill. And I said nothing. I said nothing. The ball settled, actually scared the edge of the cup and settled about 3 feet below it. Frank Tricinian stayed with Nicklaus walking along the side of the water to a huge ovation. The place was electric.
Was that the loudest you've heard there?
Well, absolutely, until I think Mickelson's ovations on Sunday this week. Definitely the loudest cheers I've ever heard. And he never cut away until Jack knocked in the putt. And when he knocked the putt in, I managed to get the words out somehow that the bear has come out of hibernation. and I thought, as soon as it left my lips, Bill, I was absolutely convinced someone else had already used that line. Because we have announcers starting at 10. Back in those days, Bob Murphy was there. Melnick was at 11. We had guys stationed all over the course. By the time it got to me, there's been a lot of material used. And I thought, why did you just re-launder somebody else's remark? That's stupid, man. That's like amateurish. So I was beating myself up, thoroughly humiliated, and got back to the compound. And I can remember Frank Tricinian and Musburger both walked up to me and said, "Hey, kid, great line. That's a line that's going to last for a long time." And I said, "Are you sure someone else didn't already say that?" They said, "Someone else used it." And of course, I saw the tape the next day. No one had. It was just a gift out of the sky. It just dawned on me at that moment, and it worked. And I got invited back for '87.
That's excellent. They should just show that every year. They should just show the final round at like 6 in the morning on the Sunday of the Masters. Because Vern Lundquist had a great one, too, on 17.
Yes, he did. And, of course, Vern found out later that, Vern Lundquist has had more phenomenal, calls and the Leitner game and this and that and Tiger's chip in 2005. But in 86, Ben Wright, when Jack made eagle at 15, and Vern didn't even know this till several years later, Ben Wright had just used the same call. Maybe, yes, sir, at 15. So then when Vern said it at 17, that's the same kind of thing I'm talking about. Vern probably had that cadence and that thought in his head, and that's the signature really line of that tournament. And Vern has a great knack for delivering it beautifully.
When did you move from being on a specific hole to actually being the overseer guy?
Well, by 88, I was doubling at 16 and hosting Butler Cabin, and that was the year Sandy Lyle won. And he made a birdie at 16, and I jumped out of the tower and and walked briskly to the Butler cabin in time to be there to award him the green jacket by the time he walked off 18. And then by 93, well, actually the very next year in 89, it was all exclusively for me in Butler cabin.
Well, I want to talk about this Butler cabin because it turns you to Jell-O. It does.
It does?
Yes. It turns you to Jell-O. It's the one place that you just look like it's almost like you can't believe you're there every year, and you've been going 25 years.
Well, it's really what it is, and people ask me all the time, what is that? Is that a place where, like, the butlers stay? They've got all kinds of crazy ideas. It's named after a famous old railroad guy who was a member of the club and named Butler, and it's just behind the par 3 course at Augusta and about 200 yards away from the 10th tee. And we use the basement level of Butler cabin, and that's been the setting since I think 1961. They transitioned from Cliff Roberts and then the Jones cabin to Butler cabin, and so I think this may have been the 50th year that the ceremony actually took place. But it's the basement level of a 3-story cabin that the rest of the year is used. When members come in to stay, there's 2 bedrooms that flank a large den area, and we're set up in the den with a fireplace there. It's transformed into a television studio. There's nothing fancy about it, nor pretentious, but when you walk in there, you can't help but feel the ghost of all of those ceremonies past. Nicholas got all of his green jackets in that room, and you think that Palmer got 2 of his 4 there. Tiger got all of his 4. There's been a lot of emotion that's been kind of like presented before the world right there, dripping with emotion. Even Faldo broke down and cried in there, for God's sakes, when he won his 3 green jackets.
So the happiest you ever were in the Butler cabin was when Fred Couples won, I'm guessing.
That's to me, thank you for bringing that up. That was April the 12th, 1992. And, when you room with a guy in college and all through school, you both are very aware of what the goal is. Freddie, from the first day I knew him, when we showed up on campus, August the 29th, 1977, he came from Seattle. I came down from New Jersey. And we were really proud to be on Dave Williams' golf team. This was a legendary golf program that won 16 national championships in 30 years, which, of course, I contributed nothing to the cause there. Let me make that very clear. I was the worst player in the history of the program by a mile, and I'm not just trying to be self-deprecating. I was out of my league. But anyway, I got thrown into a dorm room with 3 guys, all of whom made the PGA Tour, and Freddie, who had this incredible gift and had this one goal, and that was to one day win the Masters. And I can remember when we were freshmen, first meeting, like a little orientation, Coach asked us to stand up and state our names, our hometown, and what our goals are. And Freddie said, I'm Fred Couples. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I want to one day win the Masters. And I said, I'm Jim Nantz. I'm from Colts Neck, New Jersey, and I want to one day host the Masters.
Wow.
And a few years later, as I was now getting some wonderful breaks and getting some opportunity to double as a guy masquerading as a golf letterman at Houston, but also working in radio in the Houston market. I had always a tape recorder at my fingertips, and I would go cover the Astros and the Rockets and the Houston Oilers, and I would feed the tape back to guys in New York and make money as a stringer for like Win Elliott at CBS Radio, and I would bring that tape recorder back, and the guys at night would huddle around. They couldn't believe that I was in a locker room being able to talk to guys like Rick Barry and Moses Malone and Nolan Ryan and Bum Phillips, and then sometimes I'd turn that recorder on, and we would just like play act to certain scenes. And the scene at Butler Cabin, I used to convince Fred that one day, you're going to be there. I'm planning on being there. We might as well do ourselves a favor. Let's start rehearsing it right now. So in our little dorm room in Taub Hall on the Houston campus, we used to practice the green jacket ceremony, as goofy as that sounds.
I had never heard that story. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really true. And,
so what happened when you actually were in the Butler cabin in 1992?
And then you fast forward to like 14 years later, and now this thing's playing out for real. And now it's not just a couple of kids in a dorm room with big dreams. They got the whole world watching. Like 180 countries come in for that ceremony. They all take that feed. And I have to say, seriously, that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in broadcasting. I really did not think I was going to be able to get through that without breaking down, having a total meltdown. And I know Fred felt the same way, and we didn't even look at each other during the interview. And I kept it very, I thought, professional. I thought it had to be really, line of questioning that was appropriate for a guy that had just won the tournament. And then at the very end, I threw in a personal question that, I think back to our days in the University of Houston, and I wanted to get some of my guys, in on the moment, so I mentioned them. I think about Paul Marchand. I think about Blaine McAllister. I think about John Horn. We all said, someday you're going to be wearing the green jacket. And Freddie shielded his eyes. He looked off to 90 degrees away from me and put his hand over his eyes and looked off to the side and just kind of giggled, and then he still answered the question without looking at me. And he just made some generic, really pedestrian answer about how this was the one course that he really thought suited his game. He just was trying to get through it. And Ian Woosnam had presented him the coat. He was the 91 winner. The coat looked like it belonged to Woozy instead of Fred. It came down the sleeves just below the elbows. And I had it in my head that I was going to say something about it's a perfect fit. Fred Couples, Masters champion. I wasn't trying to make a statement about the jacket being a perfect fit, but I can remember saying it's a perfect fit. And Fred was looking at me and says, and I knew he was going to say not quite. And I said, Fred Couples, Masters champion. For all of us, Jim Nantz saying so long for CBS Sports. And I stood up, the two of us absolutely lost it. And that tape is out there. And, we both just cried in each other's arms for a long time. I mean, it's still kind of hard to believe that, you could grow up with two completely different goals, but they would intersect. The end result would be in one location. His goal was to be in Butler Cabin, and mine was too, in completely different roles. And then one day to end up there. I mean, that's what are the odds?
The odds are high. Well, imagine I could hear it in your voice on Sunday when, by Sunday it was kind of clear that he probably wasn't going to win, but definitely at least on Saturday, it really seemed like Fred Couples was in play to possibly take this thing. And I mean, that would have been, I think, more amazing than Jack Nicklaus. Jack Nicklaus, 50 years old, same bad back, in a Masters with Tiger trying to come back and Mickelson playing out of his mind. That would have been even more amazing, right?
Well, the funny thing is, and you said it so well earlier when you described Jack at 46, now you look at Fred at 50. Fred at 50 versus Jack's 46. I mean, Freddie seems like he's about 22 years old now versus Jack's 46.
Yeah, you're probably right.
No, but it would have been a titanic achievement, and I Saturday after he got off the air, I went by the house that he's rented there every year. I made a surprise call on him. And, of course, where else would you find him other than being slouched back in a fully reclined chair, not stretching the back, but just lounging out, waiting for a baseball game to come on. And I went by and had a few minutes there with Fred and a few pals that were around. And, I just told them very quietly that, we rehearsed that scene years ago when we were just kids. We rehearsed it many more times than just once. So let's go do it again tomorrow. I think we both know how to do that. And you know what? He really was in it, Bill.
He was.
He birdied the ninth hole and got a wonderful up and down par at 10 out of the bunker, which was really playing the round the exact same way he had in 92 in the final round. Unfortunately, he played it out right down to the shot to the 12th green right on the bank, and this time it didn't stay up. But I think he still had a chance. I really did until he hit the tee shot at 12.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty exciting. It was certainly more subplots in this Masters. I think 86 still leads the league for most subplots. This one had a lot. The whole Tiger thing. How did you feel like, on TV it seemed like the galleries were really super positive, and then I was getting emails from people who were there saying that it's a very festive tournament to go to, and people are talking, but when Tiger would come to your hole, everybody got like kind of tense. Could you feel that in the tournament?
Look, it's a gallery that applauds everyone, for starters. And, of course, there's been all this conjecture going in. Would he be met with silence? What would it be like Thursday when he stepped up to the first tee? And I think the ovation that he received at 1 on Thursday afternoon really set the course for him to play well all week. Now, I don't want this to be over-embellished because some people called it raucous. It wasn't raucous. It was definitely warm. I would say 80% at least were cheering for him. They weren't cheering wildly. Some were. Maybe 5% were, but most were cheering enthusiastically. Maybe 10% weren't cheering at all, and maybe 10% had a very, uncommitted, polite, I'll engage a little bit here for him. When you add it all up, the soundtrack, it was definitely good. And he should be very grateful for the way that he was received. I think had it been, people were talking about car keys jangling, people shouting out things, and, none of that ever happened. And I've got to say that when he walked off the 18th green on Sunday and did an interview with my colleague Peter Costas, and I'm going to cut him some slack here because you just signed the card and you've just realized that you had a chance and you didn't win the Masters. But if he could have just paused his life for a minute and thought about how he was going to handle that moment, I'm sure he would have liked to have gone back and said, you know what, I have a lot to be thankful for this week, because I think the week for him was a win.
Yeah, I agree.
He unfortunately reverted back to the old Tiger killer, and it's part of the reason why he's been such a great champion is that he's that intense. It's part of what made him great. There's a lot of things. He outsmarted everybody for years. He had more physical talent in golf than anyone, and he just had this burning intensity, which was right out there for all of us to see. So his immediate reaction was like a knee-jerk reaction back to hey, I finished fourth, didn't I? And I didn't come here to finish fourth. And that was the wrong answer at that time, I think. But again, I'm going to cut him some slack here. I think that the right answer should have been, you know what? This has been a winning week for me. I'm going to finish fourth. Obviously, I came here to finish first. I gave it all I had, given that I haven't played in 5 months. But more than anything, I want to thank everybody. This was a huge step for him, Bill, in just moving on with his life.
Yeah,
Got through. Everything from this point forward now should be easier for him. But it was a chance to.
Well, see, hold on. No, I disagree, and I wrote this in a column yesterday.
Okay.
Augusta's really a cocoon. I'm not sure there's other tournaments that are going to operate like that, because you mentioned before how nobody really heckled him or did anything. I mean, isn't the reason nobody did anything because if you did anything, you were going to get booted out and you lose your tickets, and the person who gave you the tickets also lose them forever. And, I just think if he came back to a normal tournament where they can't police the galleries like that isn't Augusta, that isn't this kind of – Augusta's really kind of a sacred place. I don't know if the galleries treat him the same way.
Well, the galleries there are definitely different, but you have to think. No one ever really knows how many people are there, but let's say it was 40,000 people a day. If someone wanted to, someone could have gotten their hands on a ticket or a badge. They would have paid enough money, and maybe, I don't know what the prices are. I know it's the hardest ticket in sport to get, but had somebody wanted to. It actually, and I was fearful. I didn't want it to happen. I wanted a fair competition to take place. If someone wanted to get their hands on a badge and not worry about the fact that they're going to be thrown off the golf course, if they said something on the first tee, is that an arrestable offense? No. Would somebody be carted away in handcuffs? No. Would somebody actually serve time for that? No. Would somebody actually be thrown off the grounds and immediately be interviewed by about 20 journalists and suddenly have that person's 15 minutes of fame in every newspaper in America? Yes. Would somebody maybe relish the chance to be the person that stood up and maybe even had been celebrated by some people for saying something that maybe some people wanted to be expressed? Yes, I thought it was a situation. Someone may weigh the odds, figure out how much it costs to get in, and not figure there's any downside, and maybe get their 15 minutes for whatever crazy reason that would be important to them. I have thought that might happen. Yeah,
and how would you have reacted if you were calling it when that happened?
I think I would have reacted the same way I reacted to everything else I saw about Tiger this week. It's interesting. There's some things that happened during our broadcast. I tried to point them out. I tried to be the storyteller and the observer that I'm paid to be. And one of the things that happened were a couple of flare-ups by Tiger on Thursday when at one point he looked like he was going to tomahawk his driver on the 11th tee, but he didn't. He restrained himself. In the old days, that might have been, slammed into the ground and whatever. But then, of course, Saturday, just minutes after we came on the air, and I know this has been discussed a lot, but he did let loose some profanity on the 6th tee, and I reacted to it. That's what I was going to do. I was going to tell people what I saw, because you got to remember, a lot of this, too, is a reaction to stuff that Tiger himself brought on, not only because of the scandal for 5 months, but in his mea culpa, how he said some of his actions were going to change. Yeah. And if I saw that I didn't think they had changed, I was going to say that. I wasn't trying to beat up on him. I wasn't trying to be an outspoken critic. I was just trying to be an observer and tell people what I saw.
Well, you played golf your whole life. You've been going to Masters for 25 years. You've been hanging around all these guys. Is it possible to fundamentally change your character and how you act when you play golf when you're 34 years old?
It's going to take time. I mean, that's obvious. It's going to take some time. I will say this, even with his mini outburst or whatever you want to call it on Saturday. Did you see that, by the way, Bill?
Of course. You know what? This is the one thing that I actually disagree with everybody about. I don't care that he reacts on the golf course. All we hear all the time is how boring golfers are and how boring tennis players are. And I miss McEnroe. And, here's a guy that he wears his emotions on his sleeve, so to speak. And in golf, is that a bad thing? I don't think so.
I think it is.
Really?
And I'm not coming down that hard on it, but here's how I feel about it. That doesn't make him better that he can take the Lord's name in vain for whatever that means. It means a lot to some people, and I know it means nothing to others. But when he says that, and he curses and swears, and he's got fathers and sons, and he's got hundreds of people that are 10 people deep in his gallery right there, why it's okay for him to react that way, but... And then people hide behind the excuse, well, he's got a camera on him all the time, after all. Well, guess what? Every shot Phil Mickelson hit for 4 days, he had a mini cam in his face, too. He had a speck fall out of a tree and land in his line as he was rolling a birdie putt on the second hole on Sunday. He didn't curse the darkness. He didn't pitch a fit.
There are degrees, though, right? I agree with you. He shouldn't use bad language.
Are we supposed to be impressed that Tiger wants it more? Are we supposed to think he wants it more than Phil Mickelson wanted or anyone else? Are we supposed to think that that's it's acceptable behavior? And I know that I don't like to compare golf and tennis. And that's, and I lived through and covered those days when McEnroe was playing. But it's just, I don't know. It's funny. Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer, they didn't have the full coverage that we have today with 18-hole coverage and all that, but they never said anything like that.
Wait, hold on, though. I think there's degrees. I agree with you. He shouldn't swear. But is it okay for him to say, come on, Tiger, and do that whole thing?
That would be absolutely 100% great as far as I'm concerned. I want the intensity. Yeah. I just don't need the four-letter words, which, again, they've been a lot worse than what we heard on Saturday. Okay, and a little bit on Sunday. And he's trying, but you see, he's so conditioned to be able to say anything he wants. And, a lot of it, hey, maybe we're partly to blame in the media. We never called him out on that before. But remember, Bill, he's the guy who said he wasn't going to do it anymore. He promised he was going to be more respectful to the game, and he was going to not have the same highs and lows. I would like to see the same highs and lows. I just don't need language that to me is unacceptable. And people say, you guys in golf, you don't get it, man. I mean, have you been to a basketball or a football game? Of course I have. I do that 40 weeks out of my year. And I know what it's like, but that's just not part of the decorum of the game. That's all I can say. And hopefully, he's trying to get better at that. I'm going to give him that.
I agree with you that he should not swear. And I think his big mistake was saying that he was going to change instead of I'm going to try to change,
right.
Which I think is a lot different. And that gives him the slack of, okay, this is a work in progress. He basically promised people, I'm not going to do that anymore. He lasted 2 rounds and was doing it.
Let me make it very clear. I want the fist pumps.
Yeah.
I don't want fist pumps, though, if I think they're trying to somehow incite a reaction out of people. And I'm not saying that's what he's done. But sometimes it stirs the gallery to such a frenzy that it's like the ground shakes. Okay, that's cool. I like Tiger's reactions. I don't need the cursing and swearing and club throwing that comes with it, and especially after he says he's not going to do it anymore. And I think he's going to try to clean that up. I like the If he's upset, come on, Tiger. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all.
When the Mickelsons were hugging at the end, you stayed quiet. You didn't say anything.
What can you say? Seriously, I was really proud of that. I was at that point had already transitioned down to Butler Cabin. I was not right above them in the 18th tower. I was watching it off of a monitor, and I just looked at that scene play out, and I said, there is absolutely nothing I can do here except get in the way.
Yeah, announcers don't do that enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, in fact, I'm looking forward to seeing the tape because, the whole thing is a little bit of a blur. It's like, I came straight to Augusta from the championship game, and until, I was on the phone with Dan Patrick earlier today, I didn't even know what I had said at the end of the Duke Butler game when Gordon Hayward threw up the shot from midcourt, and he played back that cut.
What did you say? I was at a sports bar. I didn't even hear what your call was.
I didn't transcribe it, but it was. I know there was some urgency in my voice that reflected that the shot looked like it might be going in the hole.
Gotcha.
You talking about the Hayward shot?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I said something like, I can't even recreate it because I only heard it once, but I know that I think I repeated it a couple of times that it almost went in.
Gotcha. Well, let me ask you about, you have, when the winning puck goes in, you have the line ready for it. When do you decide what the line is going to be, and what were the runner-up candidates this year for what you chose?
I really that's been something I've been asked about a lot, and that's just not the case. I mean, if you really went back and looked at my last 20 Masters, you're going to see a lot of just that are very generic, kind of for the moment. Trevor Immelman's the Masters champion. I don't have preconceived notions unless it's absolutely obvious. And the one that's going to be the one that's going to be played back forever was one that I had in my head, and that was Tiger's 97 win. A win for the ages.
I remember that.
People have criticized me he had that line in his head. Well, I defy to walk into the press room and talk to the golf writers there, most of whom are great pals of mine, and ask them on Saturday night of the 97 Masters when Tiger had a 9-shot lead going into the final round, and we all knew we were sitting on a moment that transcended the sport, that social significance was so big, and the records that were coming down due to his phenomenal, remarkable play there, that we were sitting on and documenting a moment that people are going to be talking about 200 years from now. So if you're telling me that the writers that were there weren't already on Saturday night starting to cobble together a few thoughts about what their lead would be, they've been dispatched there, presumably to do a job to write and tell the best story they can. Well, I have been too. And if Saturday night of the 97 Masters, if I went back to my room and just shut out the lights, said, I'm going to go to the course tomorrow, I'll just come up with something at the end, I'm not doing my job. I mean, I knew that little narrative that would accompany that 10-second clip was going to be played in Masters openings 10, 20, 50, 200 years from now. I wanted to make sure that it made sense. And, it didn't take a long time, but after talking to Tommy Spencer, who's a great pal of mine and works with me on all my sports, we just said, it's got to be something that's going to be representing that this is one of the all-timers, and a win for the ages is what we came up with. And that was kind of an obvious spot to be ready and teed up. I didn't have anything on Sunday planned. I really didn't. And
really? I'm shocked by that. That one seemed like there was some thought into it.
No, I going into it, Phil was in second, Westwood was in first. I had nothing for Westwood. I knew that it was going to be an emotional scene. I didn't know that Amy was going to be coming out there and standing behind the green. But when I saw her, you see, I had talked to Phil a couple of times during the week. He was like a little boy on Christmas morning when he found out she was actually going to come to Augusta. I saw him Tuesday morning, 9 hours after one shining moment. I was on the grounds at Augusta, and the first two players I saw were Tiger and Phil. And I was down at 11 taping some on cameras for a Tom Watson special that I was a part of that was going to air on Sunday.
I watched it.
Oh, thanks.
It was good.
I'm honored by that. Well, Tiger walked by first, He was playing with O'Meara. Actually, O'Meara would have been the second player I saw. And then Phil came up right behind him. And Phil was like, hey, what a game last night. Tiger and O'Meara both had not stayed awake to see the end. Of course, Phil, he's such a sports nut. He's I can't believe that shot. And he's going, I said, how's Amy? He says, she might be coming tonight. I'm going to know here in a couple hours. I'm so excited she might be coming. Well, she did come in on Tuesday night. And then the rest of the week I was checking. She was unable to get out of bed. I mean, Phil would come back from the golf course and play with the kids. You know, his daughter was out roller skating on Saturday night and fell and broke her arm. Phil took her to the emergency room Saturday night, and they were in there till 10 o'clock getting a splint for her arm. And she was not going to come out on Sunday, but after he made birdie at 12 and after he hit the miracle shot at 13, or whatever you want to call it, onto the green, she said, we're going out there. We're going to stand there at the end. He had no idea she was going to be there until he walked up to the 18th green. So now, you know, Steve Milton, our director, Lance Barrow, our producer, they cut to a shot of Amy behind the green. And at that very moment, I said, this has got to be something like, it's got to be a line about this is for Amy, or, you know, a third green jacket, but one for Amy. I had a lot of thoughts jumping around in my mind. And I saw how quickly he lined up the birdie putt, Bill. He didn't take very long. You know, it was like a 6-footer. You know, you're not going to make that 100% of the time. But he was gonna get up there and make that putt and get it over with as fast as he could, because he wanted to get to her. Yeah. So I was kind of surprised. I mean, the next thing you know, he's loading up the putt, and it's on the way. And about halfway to the hole, as I recall, it's one for the family. It's a win for the family. So I thought that summed it up. I probably could have, spent a little more time on it, but I think that was the right caption to the moment. And then I appreciate what you said. I just decided, what more can you say? For the next 2 minutes, we really just laid out.
What happens if Tiger wins? What's the call there? I mean, that one you probably have to pre-plan too.
No, in this case, I swear to you, I didn't. I can't even sit here and try to manufacture a thought on what that would have been like. But it probably would have been a very generic. Tiger Woods has won the 2010 Masters. Most of them aren't, they're not as memorable as you might think.
See, I think you should embrace this more. This is kind of your calling card a little bit. I always thought you pre-wrote these things.
I in some cases I have, like I did the Super Bowl this year. I couldn't tell you what I said. I don't think there was anything that stood out as far as a caption to that. I know there wasn't for the championship game, but
I think for the Tiger Woods one, I think it would have been something with comeback in it, like the comeback is complete, or something that signified that he came back.
It would have been. That's the thing. You can get trapped there. And
that's interesting.
The one thing I did, I told you about the win for the ages, and when he won in 2001, that was going to give him his fourth straight major title, not in one calendar year, but having started at Pebble Beach at the 2000 U.S. Open. So, people were trying to come into the Masters trying to figure out how to call this as a slam. Is it a grand slam? What is it? Several people, I was included, said several months in advance, it's just going to be known as the Tiger Slam. Yeah. So when he holed a putt on the last green, he was going to win anyway. I think I just said something about as grand as it gets, meaning it's not a grand slam, but it's pretty darn close.
That's a good one. I like that. Yeah. Well, so top 5 Masters of all time. You started in 1986. Rank your top 5. And you can't overrate the Fred Couples one because you had a personal thing. I'm just saying, best 5 tournaments you've been to.
Well, so I can't rate that number 1.
Well, no, but you got to take out your personal bias on that one. If I
take out the personal ties, then I would say Jack Nicklaus in 86, and I would say that Mickelson 07 Mickelson 2010 or 2004 those two are jockeying for second.
Really? The 2004 Mickelson?
He's competing against the 04 was, the breakthrough win for him. He had been dogged forever about not being able to win a major, and then he holds a putt on the 72nd hole. Now, there's a line that was completely unscripted. Is it his time? As the ball was on the way, and I was in the tower there, like 25 feet away, and I thought he was going to lose it on the low side, and it kind of spun in off the low edge of the cup, and I said, yes, at long last. But that was Ernie Els threw 2 eagles at him, and it was just a birdie fest, and it was a great shootout. And
I would have thought Norman Faldo was second for you.
That was like the Weber game that I called in the NCAA tournament. You walked out of there feeling like you needed to go take a shower. It was like it was an ugly, dirty ending. All kudos to what Nick did. He shot a spotless 67, but it was like watching a car wreck for 4 hours. Watching Norman bleed to death. There was a sad element to it. You hated to see somebody crumble like that.
It did
not have an uplifting feeling at all. So, you got to throw 97 in there, even though there was absolutely no suspense in it. I mean, he knocked the drama right out of it. He just crushed the competition when Tiger won by a dozen. But, I think that there's 4 pretty good ones right there, and really there haven't been any bad ones. I mean, the Larry Mize year in 87 was terrific.
2009 I wasn't crazy about.
Which one?
Angel Cabrera. Wasn't crazy about that one.
Could have been, that had the makings with Kenny Perry with 2 holes to play. He bogeys the last 2 holes and would have been the oldest major winner. That had the chance to be pretty special. But again, I think people walked away feeling like they were a little half empty in the end.
Well, you make a good point about the 96 one with Faldo Norman. See, I would argue that was the number 2 most memorable because I have never in my life watched another sporting event like that with the possible exception of Game 6 of the 1986 World Series, which happened like pretty fast within 15 minutes. The Norman thing was 2 hours. It was just, and as soon as it became clear that he was unraveling, it was still going, and it was still going, and it was still going, and it was like, as you said, by the end of it, you want to go take a shower.
Well, one we forgot to talk about was 95 Ben Crenshaw.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
That was one, again, another guy that you kind of figured his time was up, and there's no chance he could hang in there that long, and his teacher and mentor died the week of the tournament, and he missed the Wednesday practice round because he was at the funeral back in Austin, Texas. I mean, it was, there's always high drama there, but, this week has to rank right up there. I think emotionally it's kind of hard to come up with a bigger one than that. I mean, when you got your wife and your mother both battling breast cancer, and they have a difficult time traveling. They're waiting on the back of the green. It's the most anticipated Masters ever going in because of what Tiger was bringing into it. And then you go in there and play this fearless round of golf, and you basically go win it for someone else. You go win it for something bigger than yourself. I mean, it's pretty heady stuff. I
agree. It was... I'm trying to think. Can we top that one from a rating standpoint? The ratings were staggering.
Well, I'm on this new kick, Bill, I'm going to give you my condensed version of this. I really like to think I'm the greatest teammate to all the people and producers and directors, and I love to be a part of a team, and that's what we have at CBS. So I'm really happy when the ratings are good because that means the guys in the sales department are happy. It means a lot to them. But I'm not in the ratings department anymore. I think that people ask me about ratings, they've gotten off on the wrong floor. I'm on the storytelling floor. The sales and advertising guys are up on the 5th floor.
But the only thing I would say as a counter to that is that the ratings prove that there were people watching this tournament that would not normally watch the Masters. Like, for instance, my mother.
It means nothing to me. No, I mean, not to be ungrateful, but my memory of that tournament is going to be about that moment. And listen, I want the ratings to be good. Don't get me wrong. But I don't need, the validation that it did a 12 instead of an 11 rating to make me feel any better or worse about that situation. I just come off a Super Bowl as the most watched event in the history of television. And then the championship game was the most watched championship game in 13 years. And this was the 3rd most watched golf telecast of all time. But, I'm never going to remember these 3 events for that. I'm going to remember these for Drew Brees and this band of believers from New Orleans taking a victory back to a city that desperately needed it. I'm going to remember Duke and Butler for the kids who were on the floor. Kids from Butler who went to class the day of the championship game. The kid that launched the shot at midnight was in the classroom from 9 to 11 in the morning on the day of the final. I'm going to remember Phil Mickelson hugging his wife behind the green. And if somebody asked me right now, what was the rating on the Jack Nicklaus 1986 Masters, which I was there as a part of the team to document that, I couldn't tell you within 5 rating points what it was. And at this point in this time in my life, it means nothing to me.
Well, if the Butler kid had made that shot, That would have been the greatest basketball shot of all time.
No question, the greatest basketball shot of all time. And how would you rank it as the best storybook ending of any event of all time?
I think you're the big loser. You would have replaced Al Michaels with the "Do you believe in miracles?" Whatever your call would have been. I'd be hard pressed. Somebody asked me this: what was the best, most improbable, incredible, clutch, whatever you want to say, basketball shot ever? And obviously you'd go with like something like Jordan against Utah in the 98 finals, something like that. But, that was ultimately a 15-footer. Like this to make a half-court shot in any capacity is amazing. To do it to win a national title, I just don't think that might happen once every 100 years. No,
you're right. From midcourt, it was 71,000, not 17,000, 71,000, 65,000 of whom are locals cheering you on. Yeah. You're a mid-major out of the Horizon League. You're battling teams like Wright State and Cleveland State and Valparaiso all year, and now you're taking on mighty Duke and Mike Krzyzewski for the national championship, and you have a heave from midcourt to win it. And you know what? He's an inch long with that shot. It's 47 feet. You think about it, where that hit on the window, if it was an inch lower, that's it, 1 inch. He had the perfect angle on it. It's an inch. That's all it was. And it would have definitely been the greatest shot in the history of basketball. Yeah, I agree. I mean, right now you'd probably say the alley-oop, the NC State alley-oop, greatest college. Pros, you'd pick a bunch of other ones, but I think that the NC State alley-oop, because that was a buzzer beater and it was amazing and all that stuff. What was the best shot? That was not an alley-oop.
It was, a shot that, whatever you want to call it, yeah.
Well, that one's a sore subject for me because I, of course, I was brought into the business thanks to Guy Lewis, the Houston basketball coach, who allowed me when I was a student to be his public address announcer, and then asked me to host his coach's show starting my junior year while living in the dorms. I was on the NBC affiliate there, and that's how I got my start in the business. I was very close to that basketball team, and I was sitting in the stands when that Derek Wittenberg launch came up all air, and Lorenzo Charles just happened to be standing in the right place to put it back for the win. That was April the 4th, 1983, and I've got to tell you, that one I'm still not gotten over.
Where was Hakeem on that rebound?
Hakeem was in the paint, and for some reason he made a step forward toward the free throw line, and that's when Charles went behind him, and Hakeem just got out of position. But right before the shot, Thurl Bailey had the ball in the left corner, and he whipped it back out to the top of the key to Wittenberg, and Clyde Drexler got within a fingernail of deflecting that pass, which would have then caromed toward the Houston end of the court, and the game would have ended with a Drexler layup and a victory. If that was a fraction, that was less than an inch away from Clyde stealing that ball and taking it in with enough time to win the championship at the other end. And that one, I played back that game 100 times in my head. I gave Clyde his nickname. I nicknamed him the Glide.
You did?
I did.
I didn't know that.
I wrote the foreword to his book, The Glide, and we were all in school together. And Clyde's a great friend of mine, and that whole team, to this day, they're very good pals of mine. And that day of that championship game, I actually rode to the pit in Albuquerque with the team on the team bus. And I went into the arena that day without a credential and without a ticket because I had flown in. I was now just a young broadcaster in Salt Lake City working for the CBS affiliate and doing the Jazz games with Hot Rod Hundley. So I flew down for the championship after this great dunk exhibition defeating Louisville in the semifinals. And Guy Lewis said, come on down. And I went over to the arena with the team and walked in with the players carrying their bags. I walked in, squeezed right between Larry Mishaw and Hakeem Olajuwon. And I walked into the arena, and the pit back then was bench seating. So you could squeeze maybe 15 or 20 people if you wanted to get cramped enough into a row. But I was the first one, basically. They hadn't let the crowd in because I came in with the team. And I looked over into the corner of the arena, and there was Brent Musburger and the CBS set. He was not calling the game. Gary Bender was with Billy Packer then. And I went over to watch Brent kind of go through the elements of the show. I was mesmerized watching, like from 2 feet away. I was pressed up against his set. I could have leaned over and I could have shined his shoes, which I would have been perfectly willing to do, by the way, had he asked. And he was sitting there like rehearsing the opening and the whole thing. I could hear him talking to his floor director and the producer, and I was watching the camera guys, and I was just in awe of that. And I thought I would give anything someday if I could ever do that. 3 years later, that was 83. 3 years later in 86, I was the guy sitting on that set by some miracle. And I was hosting from Dallas when Louisville beat Duke in the championship game. I was sitting on that same set.
What's the best college hoops game that you've done?
Well, I think Duke Butler has to be a candidate. I know you always get, unfortunately, a little tainted by recent memory. But, the UNLV Duke game in the 91 national semifinals when UNLV came in undefeated, that was a pretty important game. We were about to have another undefeated team, the first since Indiana, and then, Leitner and Grant Hill and Bobby Hurley and all of them, having been smashed the year before by 30 in the final to UNLV, this time beat them in the semifinals. It made the championship game against Kansas pretty forgettable, but, that was kind of a landmark game, I thought.
I think that, I agree. Butler-Duke was incredible, but, some of those older games had guys who were legitimate players who were going to go on and do some things in the NBA. Whereas this game, we're not going to remember any of those guys ultimately. So I'm more partial to that UNLV Duke game personally.
The UNLV Duke,
Yeah, just Grant Hill's in that game, and Leitner and Larry Johnson and Stacey Ogman. Those guys were almost overqualified to be in college.
Yep.
Whereas the Butler Duke, who's going to be the best guy who comes out of that game? Gordon Hayward?
I think so.
Yeah. So why haven't you made more sports movies?
I know. Listen, everybody looks at it a little bit differently, and I know. And I said this going into the tournament. This is why I forecast this is going to be the wildest year ever. It doesn't pass the eye test anymore. When you watch the college game, the talent's just not there anymore.
Nah,
it's not there. But that doesn't mean that it's hurt the excitement of the game, as evidenced by what we just had in March. It just doesn't pass the eye test, and those days are gone forever. To me though, it raises some great questions. Like, is it really worth it if you're Kentucky? Is that really something you're proud of to say those kids came in here and they played for Kentucky for 1 year? Anything short of a championship to me is almost a failure because they weren't a part of your team. They don't become a part of the heritage of your team. They're just mercenaries who come in for a year and play.
It's not even a year. It's sometimes probably 7 months.
Really, if you knew, and there's probably the dirty little secret is, how much work did they really do for the second semester of their freshman year?
None. And you know what? As soon as they're bounced, they don't even. It's not like you have to keep going to class. You're not going to graduate anyway. It's not like they're going to remove the wins that the team had if the guys don't finish the semester. I think it's a mess. I don't understand why they don't, not just that, but the fact that the coaches can change schools whenever they want. And I don't know. I don't like the product, which is why it made this tournament so much fun, because you forget, ultimately, it's really fun to watch March Madness. But there's so much wrong with the sport. It drives me crazy. And a lot of it seems to be fixable.
I think the 1 year and done thing either needs to be eliminated or it needs to be increased to 2 years.
Yes, 2 years is, and you know what? David Stern would love it. It's better for the NCAAs, and even you think this year, or take for instance Derrick Rose 2 years ago, who goes into the league right away and he's great. If he had been at Memphis for 2 years instead of one, now I feel like that second year, I know Derrick Rose. Oh, I know this Memphis team. I watched them last year. I'm familiar with them. That Kentucky team was like an AAU team that was thrown together. Everybody in that team had just met.
If you're John Calipari and you miss 1 year of a recruiting class like that, you're dead.
Yeah.
Because your program is stripped bare. He's at ground zero right now. I don't know what he's got coming in next year. I'm sure he's already got the next great point guard lined up. In fact, I already has. But if you miss 1 year, if you're going to go that route, you better be careful, because that's going to be ugly. It's going to be ugly fast. And, I'm not a big fan of the way that works. Somebody was interviewing me a couple weeks ago for a television show, and they wanted me to talk about the greatest players of the past decade in the NCAA tournament. They already had the top 10 list. And they started going through the list, and they asked me to comment on it. These are the top 10 players in the NCAA tournament in the last 10 years. And, of course, they teed up like they started chronologically. Shane Battier, because he was on the 2001 championship team. You got to include him for what he did in the college game.
Sure.
I don't know what he's done in the NBA. Then we went to Carmelo Anthony, who, of course, won a title for Syracuse in 2003. And then they brought up Kevin Durant. And I said, hold on a minute. Kevin Durant, what was his contribution to the NCAA tournament? And they said, well, he's a great player now. No, I said, I'm sorry, I thought this show was about the greatest players in the NCAA tournament in the last decade. Well, it is, but he's a great... No, I said, no, if you're going to include Kevin Durant in this show, I'm not going to be included in this show.
Wow.
There is no way that I am going to put my credibility on this show if you're going to include Kevin Durant. I said, let me ask you a question. How many games did Kevin Durant play in the NCAA tournament? The producer didn't know the answer. I did. He won one game. They were out in the West Regional. They won their first-round game. They lost their second-round game. He never got out of the first weekend of the NCAA tournament, the 1 year he played, and I'm not trying to discredit Kevin Durant, but he made no lasting impact on the NCAA tournament that year, much less the whole decade.
I mean, you could say Lonnie Baxter was a better choice.
Of course. How about Juan Dixon?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's absurd, but that's where, like, you have to, like, understand when you put the headset on and you start to cover March Madness, this is not about the NBA. And this translates back to what you were talking about, like with Kentucky, is that, okay, if you're going to run a program here where it's a 1 year, if you will, like prep school before the NBA, okay, I don't know what that feels like. I would think the people at Kentucky don't feel all that close to John Wall these days.
Yeah.
I don't think that John Wall names, in terms of like Kentucky lore, you put him up there with, the guys like, Jack Gibbons, who won one of the greatest championship performances of all time. I mean, where do you put him? Well, really, what did he do?
And I think Coach K, this has been a strategy for him. He didn't want those John Wall type guys. He wanted guys that were at least going to be there 3-4 years and got criticized for it earlier part of the decade. And now maybe this is a better way to go. I mean, he might have, I don't want to call him a genius, but he might have definitely found this was an advantage and been right.
I think every major coach at a big-time program has had to make that gut-wrenching call. Which way am I going to go? Am I taking the 1 year and done, or am I going to take the guy that's not quite the top 3 or 4 or 5 prospect in the country? Top 100 guy, yeah, we need him. But I need a guy that I'm going to develop, and I'm going to have him around the program for a while. And really, that's what you saw on the floor. You saw guys that take the growth of Nolan Smith. That kid couldn't be more impressive. Yeah. I think actually, and I hate to project, I think he's going to be a really good pro. I think he's a good point guard. His scoring has increased. His leadership is off the charts. The kid's just a wonderful kid. He's gone through the Duke program, the tutoring of Mike Krzyzewski. He's going to help someone down the road. And,
I agree.
That's those are the kind of kids that I enjoy having a chance to celebrate, covering the NCAA tournament.
2 more quick questions and we'll let you go. Why have you only done one sports movie?
And that's a good question. When you said that at first, I was trying to think, did I ever do anything else other than Tin Cup? But
that was it. I looked it up. It was like you said, Tin Cup, I can't top this. I'm out.
No. Why am I thinking there was some other cameo on something? I don't know. But, I just did a sitcom this year. I hope you saw it, Bill.
What was it? How
I Met Your Mother.
Really? I do not watch that show. I did not know you did one.
Show. I was on with Nick Swisher, had a walk-on cameo on that, and I think Nick probably thought it was going to be a little larger role, but and I wasn't there the same day he shot, but I was there with Neil Patrick Harris through the whole show. It was February 1st it aired. It was, and believe me, it was meaningful to me because they put it on the first day of sweeps month in February, which meant they had to think it was a decent episode. And, I've gotten so much feedback about that. It was a lot of fun.
That's funny.
Last year, I did a little thing on How I Met Your big thing on How I Met Your Mother. Everybody loves Raymond Arliss. I've done a lot of TV stuff. But the movie stuff, I'm very selective, Bill.
It's got
to be the right script, man.
I think you should tell your agent that I brought this up in a podcast, and you started thinking about it, and it made you very upset that you haven't done more sports movie stuff, and you feel like he's failing you.
Look, I think that, seriously, I'm really totally grateful for everything I've had a chance to do. I'm not entitled to do anything, and I never take for granted the fact that I'm asked to come back and do the NCAA tournament or the NFL on CBS again, because it's a fickle business. And it was not written on my birth certificate that I was entitled to do any of these things. So each one is a gift. And I don't take it to the bank that I'm going to be doing any one of them again. And I love to have the chance to do them. I'm very grateful.
All right. Diplomatic answer, but do a sports movie. Last question. Overtime. You came on Inside the NFL last year. I think it was last year.
Yeah.
And you unleashed a side of Jim Nantz that I didn't even know existed. You're a bulldog. You annihilated those guys with your overtime argument, and now they have seemingly fixed the overtime rule. Although for some reason not in the regular season, they're just doing the playoffs, which is I'm scratching my head over that. But are you happy with the new rule?
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. Hopefully, I've shown you that same side here today, Bill.
We loved it. I loved it.
But I had some data compiled last year by Ethan Cooperson, who's my stats guy in the NFL, because every time the argument came up, people got into all the stats since 1974, the first year that the overtime rule began. Well, the game has changed so much, in 30-plus years, that the numbers were skewed and watered down by what happened in the early years. That didn't matter anymore. The game's been opened up so dramatically. And for people that were stuck on this argument, I like it just the way it is. Well, if people had that same kind of mindset, they'd still be out there in leather helmets.
Right.
I mean, hey, the game has changed. The game has become a much more wide-open game. And then statistically, it was indisputable that in the last 10 years, that the team that won the coin flip, whether they won it on the first possession or later down the road, were winning in the 60 percentile, up somewhere between, given year, 62 to 68% of the time. It was 2-1. But to me, the biggest crime was the first possession win. And if you really look at the 2008 season numbers, it was almost 50% of the time won by the team that won the coin flip. Well, I like to invest a little bit of money, whatever I have left. And, if I could get a 50% return on my money, I'd be pretty happy.
Yeah.
If I knew I could win a coin flip and I'm going to get a 50% chance of winning without even having to give up the football, those odds are absurd. Something had to be done. And my fear all along was we're going to have the biggest game of all, the Super Bowl, and someone's not going to get a chance to touch the football. In fact, I thought we were headed there this year when Peyton and the Colts were driving and they were down 31-24 and he threw the pick and it got run back for the touchdown. I thought they were going in for the tying score, and now guess what? Either Breeze or Manning's not going to get a chance to match a coin flip victory, 4 plays, and a cheap field goal victory. You play the whole season, you start 2-a-days in July, and you get to the championship of it all, and you got a guy like Peyton Manning doesn't get a chance to touch the football. This is ridiculous. So the statistics were there. And thankfully, by the way, it's amazing how much of an outcry there really was by the written community. Guys that were trying to, kill the thing, I thought, in some of their national columns when they heard that they were going to the owners' meeting and it was actually going to be put before a vote. It's like they put their own credibility into trying to persuade these guys not to have change. I never understood it. And then, of course, it was a big outcry because they voted while the coaches were out of the room.
Yeah.
But, the competition committee, which included Bill Polian, which, by the way, included Jeff Fisher from Tennessee, they unanimously put this forward. So it had a coach that was on that committee. And when it went before the owners, it went through in flying colors. And I think it's a great first step. I just don't see why they don't do it for the regular season.
You know what's funny about their whole argument about the regular season? Like it would be bad for, games might be too long, safety of the players and all that. Okay, well, why are you considering an 18-week regular season then? Why don't we care about the safety of the players there?
That kills that argument. The whole thing about, the games are too long. The other thing, of course, is that the games are going to be too long and it's going to run into 60 minutes. Again, as I've told you already, I'm not concerned about that. Yeah. I'm not concerned about the ratings. Look, CBS and all these networks put up over $4 billion a year to rent the rights to broadcast the NFL. So whatever it is you have on after the NFL, it can't be as important as that investment you have in the NFL. So let's play these games out until we have an equitable way to decide a winner. So I applaud these guys. I think it's a neat thing. And then, there's a lot of talk here in the coming weeks. There's another meeting scheduled that's always on the schedule. Then in May, they may go ahead and consider this for this regular season.
They should. I don't see how I've never heard of a sport having one set of rules for the regular season and another for the playoffs.
But they did anyway. The reality is they did anyway, because in the regular season a game could end in a tie. But in the playoffs, of course, it can't.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But this is a fundamental difference that there's no reason it just couldn't transfer to the regular season. I haven't yet to hear an argument that makes sense for why that just wouldn't count for every game.
You know what really got this thing bogged down and they could never get out of their own way is no one could ever figure out the way to apply some new rules. Everybody had some theories, and then once they started getting into these tangential discussions about, well, do you want the college rule, which would never be considered in the NFL, but it wasted time and energy, and it lost focus on what they were trying to do. I think the solution they came up with, hey, it's good enough. I'm happy with that. All I wanted was to be assured that I wanted both teams to be able to have a possession. Now, that still may not happen, because if you win the toss and you go down and score a touchdown, then the game's over. But at least it's going to be a hard-earned win. I'm glad the cheap field goal victory has been eliminated, for the playoffs. And hopefully they will put that in for the regular season.
How worried are you about a lockout?
I don't have any insight about what the odds are, but again, all you hear about is almost like it's a slam dunk. Of course, we got a year to go before that's going to happen, and unfortunately, in all of these major sports, and you get the unions and you get the two sides, and nobody's ever motivated until you're a day away from the first game or the first point where there's no return. And I'm afraid we're going to get there in 11. I really am. I'm very frightened by it, and I don't know what that's going to be like or how long it's going to go. But I know as a fan, and I've never called baseball because I know I'm not a good enough baseball announcer to do it, but I'm a baseball fan. And when they walked out on that season, what year was that, Bill?
94.
When they walked out in 94, they still don't have me all the way back. Yeah. I've never, ever, the fan side of me, I've never forgiven baseball totally for doing that, walking out at that point in the season. The NFL has it so good right now. It is the sport. It is the television sport. It's America's sport. It really is. Everything proves that out. The popularity has never been bigger, and everybody's very wealthy. Everybody's making a lot of money. And, to me, I just hope they don't do a disservice. I just worry about it from the fans.
There's too much money at stake. I think it's actually going to happen in basketball. But in football, everybody's making too much money. It's ridiculous. It's like you're splitting up billions of dollars, basically. And at some point, they'll have to figure that out. I'm much more worried about the NBA.
Well, the NBA, there's some real question marks about who really is making money there.
Yeah.
When it comes to the owner's side of it, they've got real problems there.
Yeah, they have a broken financial structure, whereas the NFL seems to have a disagreement over who should be making the most. But, it's never a bad problem when people can't figure out who should be making the most money out of everybody involved. So it should figure out. All right, we took enough of your time. Jim Nantz, a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed your first BS Report appearance.
Well, I just hope it's just like the 86 Masters. I hope I did enough to get invited back.
Of course you did. Well, now you go, where do you go for 5 months? What happens to you?
The next 5 months, CBS has a golf tournament on the air every week except for 3. Up until the first week of the NFL season, we're on the air with CBS Golf every week but 3. Now, I'm not going to do them all. I'm going to do this week at Hilton Head, and I'm going to do, I've got like 9 of the next 10 weeks. And, they're not the high-profile events like the ones we just come off of, but there's a lot of good friendships and relationships because I've been doing tournaments like the Byron Nelson and the Colonial and Nicholas's Memorial Tournament and the folks down in Charlotte where I think Tiger will return the first week of May. I think that's his next appearance.
Which one?
It's the Wells Fargo event at Quail Hollow in Charlotte.
Oh.
It's the weekend of May 1st and 2nd. That's where I predict Tiger and Phil will resurface again the next time.
Well, that would be a Hall of Fame sports weekend because Mayweather Mosley is that weekend too, and then NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs,
and the Derby.
Oh, and the Derby! Oh my God!
Yeah, so I really think that's going to be the Tigers' next occurrence, and Phil's also. But we have all these tournaments, and I enjoy it. I have a wonderful life. And I'm really, and you said diplomatic was the way you framed it, but I really am appreciative that I get to do three different things. The variety makes life interesting. Yeah. I have a 5-month stretch where really my life is the NFL. I love that time of year, being with Phil Simms and calling the national doubleheader every other week, the Super Bowl every third year. Calling the playoff games, the big game. There's the electricity goes with that. It's awesome. And now I'm in kind of the part of the year where, you talk about ratings. These aren't big rated events, but they're enjoyable. They're fun.
Well, we'll see if Tiger comes back. I think that changes. I forgot to ask you, how many tournaments do you think he plays this year? 6?
He'll play, you're supposed to play 15. I think he'll be under that. I think, and he has reasons why he doesn't have to do the 15 minimum to lose his card, as they call it. But I think he'll be somewhere more around 12. But it's all guesswork on my part. I know one thing's for sure. After the way he played at Augusta, and I know he said he wouldn't have come back if he didn't think he had a chance to win. He's going to still win. People were wondering after all this that came down, will he ever be the same? Will he ever win again? And yeah, he may face some things that he didn't see at Augusta. You might be right on with that. But I think that the talent is still there, and the ambers are still burning as he showed us again at Augusta. And he's still got another 10 prime years. And he's going to be winning again, and I would be very surprised if he doesn't win at least one of the next 3 majors.
Do you have an opinion on a golfer's prime, or do you think it changes?
I think it's changed. You kind of hit on it earlier. When Nicklaus was 46, that was way past your prime. Now I put the ceiling pretty much, really to be at prime. Jack hadn't won in 6 years before he won that tournament. I think you can go to about 45. Excuse me. You know what that means? Phil Mickelson turns 40 the week of Pebble Beach in the U.S. Open this year. I think realistically, and I'm just going to use that number randomly, and Phil's in good shape. He's whipped himself into good shape. Phil has 20 more majors in his prime. 5 years times 4. He's got 20 more majors. I think the Tiger has 40 more majors in him where he's in his prime. So I think the Tiger, if you will, is somewhere around, if I may use some sort of Augusta metaphor here, he's somewhere around amen corner right now in his career. He's somewhere around 11, 12, or 13.
Right.
In terms of what hole he's on. Because he's been playing out there for 13 years. I think he's got about 10 prime years left. That doesn't mean he couldn't win at 48. Freddie almost won at 50. But I think his prime years, he's got 40 majors left. I think Phil's got 20 left. And I think 10 years from now, when we reach that mark, 10 years from today, 2020, that a guy like Anthony Kim, who's 24 now, will be 34, and he'll be in the middle of a very big career.
I was just going to ask you about him. I think if I had to pick one guy under 28, I think he'd be the guy.
Well, you look at he's been battling some injuries, so a lot of people have been disappointed he didn't back up this gigantic year he had in 2008 when he won at 22. He won 2 significant tournaments, but he hasn't been healthy. Part of that is a little recklessness on his own, snowboarding and skiing and all these kind of things that he hasn't been as dedicated as Tiger was to trying to win all the time early in his career. But there are so many other possibilities beyond the boundaries of the United States. This Rory McIlroy from Northern Ireland who's injured, Ryo Ishikawa from Japan. Take this kid Matteo Manassero, who is 16 years old and made the cut at the Masters. He looks absolutely like a dead ringer for Seve Ballesteros at that age, physically and game-wise. That was his hero. He plays like him, looks like him. It's hard to believe that someday we're going to be out of the Mickelson-Woods era. But, the reality is, Bill, we're getting pretty close to that.
Yeah, and we said that once upon a time when I was growing up as a kid. Like, hey, someday Jack Nicklaus and Tom Watson won't be around anymore. It's like,
Yeah,
but then,
Jack and Arnold Palmer are now the ceremonial starters at Augusta.
Right. All right, Jim Nantz, thanks so much. Love to have you back sometime soon.
Hey, Bill, I just enjoyed it very, very much. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you.
until I get the sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the B.S Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.
With all the talk about sports, Bill Simmons neglected to mention this important just breaking news. Subway now has breakfast. And unlike the competition, you can get it made just the way you want. Like the Subway Western Egg White Muffin Melt. Add jalapenos, banana peppers, tomatoes, or try Monterey Cheddar. Build your better breakfast at Subway. And after you build your better breakfast, grab your favorite $5 footlong to go. Made to your order all day, every day. Only at Subway.